Well, folks, thank you so much for being here today on this Thursday. Welcome to February. We are going to be talking today about the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. I will be sharing my screen in just a moment and passing it over to Jack to talk a little bit about the program and implications for Maine. And then, as always, we'll have a healthy discussion at the end to talk about any questions that you may have. So today we're going to be talking about RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and we'll be probably referring to it as RGGI because that's a good shorthand. It's a really prominent piece of climate programming in the Northeast, but really one of the biggest models of a carbon cap and trade system anywhere in the world. It is acclaimed for the benefits that it brings to participating states, including Maine. And we're going to get into some of that history and why we're talking about it at this juncture. So I think a few of you are new folks this time around, which is exciting. This is our climate and clean energy team in front of the State House, where you'll find us very frequently between Monday and Friday, anytime January to June. I'm on the far left there. Jack is our program director, and then Rebecca Schultz, who will not be joining us this time, really is our whiz on all things grid and working with the Public Utilities Commission. If you've joined climate action calls before, you know that the real intention here is to learn. First and foremost, our climate and clean energy experts provide you a little peek under the hood as to what we're working on any given month and provide some technical background as to why it's important that we're working on that. We then have a Q&A section, and we always end with an opportunity to take action so that you can walk away from this call knowing how to effectuate change in alignment with our climate and clean energy agenda. So this is what it's going to look like today. We'll start with an overview of just what RGGI is to get you settled in, and then look at some of the program benefits for Maine since its initiation back in 2009. And then we'll talk a little bit about a bill, LD 2037, that is currently before the State House that is required for Maine to continue participating in the RGGI program. Give you some background on that. And then, as I said, we'll end with some opportunities for you to engage and have a good discussion about the program. So with that, I'll pass it over to Jack, and we can get things rolling.
All right. Thanks, Josh. And I'm excited. I'm up here in our office. I'm gonna be headed over to the State House a little bit later to talk about AI data centers, which is exciting. But before we start talking about Reggie, I wanted to flag a new analysis that came out from the Maine Department of Energy Resources. Um, Electricity prices are a very hot topic. Um, and there's been a lot of rhetoric around what is driving electricity prices in Maine. If you have joined any of these calls over the past couple years, you know that the primary driver of electricity prices for people and businesses in Maine is natural gas prices. Um, Most of the power generation in New England, which is the grid that we are a part of in Maine, is powered by natural gas. And so when natural gas prices go up, electricity prices go up. It's not the only factor, but it is the primary one. Um, on the other hand, we have seen a lot of folks who have been talking about how it's all because of solar and renewables and that there's a solar tax and all this sort of stuff. That's, you know, there are some program costs to our renewable energy policies in Maine, but they are tiny compared to many of the other cost drivers, including our dependence on natural gas. But I wanted to flag this for everyone. It is a detailed report. So, it's not like they didn't streamline it all that much for public consumption. But I do think if this is an area that you're interested in, or an area that you're interested in talking to your legislators about, or local officials about, or anyone really, it's a good resource to have. It's relatively brief, and I'm going to put the link to it in the chat, and Josh can also make sure that this goes around um, after the call in the follow-up email. But the very quick, if you click through on that link on, just the second page, or really, the first page after the title page, they have sort of the big takeaway, which is that electricity rates in Maine are under pressure due to a combination of factors, including dependence on fossil fuels for electricity generation, growing storm-related costs, also related to climate change, aging infrastructure, and inflationary pressures. So those are the primary cost drivers that people are experiencing in their electricity bills now. Um, so anyway, take a look at this when you get a chance. It's really well done. I think it's sort of a foundational resource. It's only 12 pages, and has some good factual basis for what is actually causing electricity prices um, to to be high in Maine, and also at the at the end, some of the considerations that that we can take into account when we think about managing those energy costs, which do include many of the things that we've been advocating for a long time: transitioning to renewables, investing in load flexibility, and electrification and energy efficiency. Um, so that little tidbit about electrification and energy efficiency is actually a great segue to talking about RGGI. And you can even just jump right to the next slide. Um, so as Josh mentioned, RGGI is short for the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is something that started to be talked about in the early 2000s and was first sort of formally proposed in a MOU, or Memorandum of Understanding, between a bunch of northeastern states in 2005. Over the next couple years after that, the program was actually sort of established and put together. The states negotiated what the program would look like. And it was put into place sort of formally amongst the states and started operating in 2008, 2009. And what the program is a multi-state cap and trade program targeted at reducing power plant pollution. And how it works is that fossil fuel power plants over a certain size, so it's not, someone's generator in their garage, it's 25 megawatts and over, so pretty sizable. If they are in one of the participating states and they want to emit carbon pollution, which they all do, they have to buy an allowance to cover their emissions. And those allowances are auctioned. So the prices of the allowances can shift based on supply and demand. Now, all of the auction revenue is taken and it is sent back to the participating states. It's sort of allocated back to the states, and those states can do with what they want to do with the money. Here in Maine, the establishment of RGGI was linked to the establishment of Efficiency Maine Trust. Efficiency Maine being the place where that money went to, and and then it was used for energy efficiency and electrification programs. So, as Josh mentioned, this has been a hugely successful program. Over the course of RGGI's existence in participating states, carbon pollution from power plants, depending on the analysis you look at, has dropped by 46 to 50%. Um, some of that is tied to the sort of fracking boom and natural gas displacing coal, as sort of like a broader trend. But RGGI definitely had a role to play in there in sort of affecting the economics of the power sector and making renewable energy more competitive over time and increasing the efficiency of our state's economy and helping save money for folks. It's delivered almost $6 billion in economic benefit for participating states in reduced energy costs, reduced pollution, added 48,000 job years. That's sort of the equivalent of a job, statistically a job for a year. And you can see on the slide here the list of participating states. There have been some states that have come in and out. Under Chris Christie, New Jersey popped out, but then went back in. Virginia entered the program, and then their Republican governor dropped us out. Pennsylvania sort of never was fully in, but was on their way in. But due to a sort of a budget deal that their current governor Josh Shapiro, no relation, cut, they sort of pulled out of the program in 2025. And Halsey, I see your hand. We'll save questions, I think, for the end of the presentation. Um, Next slide, please, Josh. Okay. For Maine, Reggie has been a huge source of investment into our efficiency programs. 246 million in total investment. That goes up every quarter. The auctions of allowances are quarterly. And as Efficiency Maine has turned its focus more to low income programs, we've definitely seen that number start to grow as well. In the last fiscal year, where there's data for it, more than $12 million went to Efficiency Maine's low income initiatives. Overall, though, every dollar that we invest in energy efficiency and electrification through Efficiency Maine saves $4 in energy costs. And in 2023 alone, we see that the investments that were made just in that one year, over the course of the investments, will save $130 million over time. This is something that we see really consistently with Efficiency Maine's work. They are absolute hawks on the cost benefit analysis side of things. But generally speaking, energy efficiency investments are incredibly cost effective over time. And so having this funding to help with the upfront costs of some of those improvements to homes or businesses really does pay off. So this has gone to weatherization stuff, heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, and even larger industrial energy efficiency projects, where Efficiency Maine sort of works on a custom basis with some of the big energy users to save energy, which benefits us all by reducing, grid infrastructure and energy supply costs. All right, next slide here. Okay, why are we talking about Reggie now? Why? I have an answer for that on the next slide. Um, so because Reggie is a cap and trade system, the amount of emissions that are allowed within the system are set by the program participants. All of the states that participate have, a governing body, and they periodically will review the program and sort of reset the emissions trajectories that are allowed. This keeps it so the cost of allowances doesn't get too high, creating like energy price spikes through too much scarcity. But it also means that the cost of those allowances don't get too low because there's too many of them, which would mean there's sort of not enough cost to polluting, and then revenue wouldn't be coming back to the states. So the third program review just concluded, and all the states need to adopt it. Some states do it through like a rulemaking administratively. Maine is one of the states that does it through legislation, and this is our year. LD 2037 was put forward by Representative Chris Kessler, working with the Department of Environmental Protection. It updates Maine's allocation of allowances and sort of enables the DEP to go ahead and do the rulemaking that like implements the program. We have to do this to stay in the program. Without it, we would not have an allocation of allowances to put into the auction to then get the money to make the efficiency investments. So if we don't pass this, we're giving up those millions of dollars of investment. Now, what would be the potential benefits of leaving the program, you may ask? Well, it turns out there are none, or they are extraordinarily minimal. Because we're part of the regional market, ISO New England, we Maine being out of the program would not have any effect on sort of the region-wide wholesale market costs, because Massachusetts and Connecticut and Rhode Island and others are still part of the RGGI program and have no intention of leaving. So if we fail to pass LD 2037, we will get no benefit, and we will miss out on the millions upon millions of dollars that are sort of critical for our energy efficiency investments. So you can go to the next slide, Josh. The good news is that we had a really strong showing at the hearing. The DEP, State Department of Energy Resources, Efficiency Maine, bunch of advocates all showed up and sort of clearly made this case. The bill did get out of committee last week and was reported out. We should be seeing it on the floor soon. Um, but it's really important, I think, that folks hear from their constituents, folks in the legislature. This really truly is a no-brainer, just because of the way that our market is set up and the particulars of this. But no-brainers are not always no trouble in the legislature. So definitely important for folks to hear from you. So I'll stop there. I think I'm turning it back over to you, Josh, now, and we can go from there. So
Totally.
back to the studio, Josh.
Thanks, Jack. I'm excited for the Q&A here. I mean, as Jack mentioned, I think this bill is positioned in such a way that right now is a really important time for legislators to hear from constituents, encouraging them to pass LD 2037. So it's emerged already from the Energy Utilities and Technology Committee. You can see our testimony that we provided in favor of that bill online. We also have an op-ed about the RGGI program that I'll share with this group as well. So if you want to do some research before contacting your state legislators, we definitely have those resources for you. We also have a legislator lookup tool that I'm sure a lot of you have used before, but if you just put in your address, it will spit out your state senator and state representative and their contact information so that you can reach out directly to them. Some of you may not know this, but I think a lot of you do. State legislators are very accessible in the state of Maine. You can either walk into the state house and find them in the halls and have a conversation with them, or you can call either their personal phone number, which is often listed, or their state house phone number, or reach out to their state house email. So there are a number of ways to contact your state legislators. Because Maine is a relatively small state, a handful of contacts really goes a long way. So we often hear, oh, 5 people contacted me about this. This is something on my radar now, right? Like 5 people is really a motivator for legislators. And as Jack said, we've seen some other states move away from this program due to pressure from the fossil fuel industry. We really want to make sure that Maine continues to benefit from a program that has provided so much benefit to us over the past 10 years and even longer. So please do reach out to your state legislators after this call once we send some of the information about the RGGI program. You also have an opportunity to tell your story. We think this would be a really good juncture if you have done an energy efficiency project through Efficiency Maine, whether that's a weatherization project, whether you installed heat pumps. If Efficiency Maine has provided a rebate for you to be able to advance your energy efficiency initiatives at home, this is an opportunity for you to either write a letter to the editor or an op-ed, or if you wanted to work with us on a guest blog to say, why Efficiency Maine's investments are so important to you as a Mainer. This would be a really phenomenal juncture to do that. We also have a letter to the editor tool that we can share with you after this call. So if you are excited about, spending 10 minutes to write 250 words about why energy efficiency matters to you and why Maine should stay in the RGGI program, we would love to see some of those publications. The dual benefit to having letters to the editor published is that the general public is being informed that this is a really important program, but you can also use that letter to then send to your legislator and say, hey, I took the time to write this letter to the editor. I hope that you saw it in print, and I hope that you'll vote for LD 2037. So it really just reinforces our ability to communicate with legislators. I also just wanted to plug that we are doing a waste day of action, a lobby day at the State House. You may know our colleagues Vanessa and Branya, who have been on these calls before. They're going to be leading the charge on Thursday, February 12th at 9 a.m. You may know that NRCM hosts regular lobby days. This is where we teach you how to walk over to the State House and communicate directly with your legislators about important issues of the day. There are several different bills that Vanessa is going to be focused on, having to do with ensuring their extended producer responsibility program is still up and running in the state. A battery recycling and stewardship program. So there are several bills that they're going to be working on advocating for. Anytime you're at the State House, though, is a juncture for you to communicate the things that you want to see your legislator work on. So we encourage you to join us on Thursday, February 12th, if you are available. These are some ways to keep in touch. A lot of you have reached out directly to me to ask questions. We really encourage you to do so. Check us out on our various socials. I also wanted to note as well that NRCM, as you know, is a membership organization. We really rely on our members to keep the wheels turning at NRCM. So if you are not yet a member of NRCM, we encourage you to do so. And all the information about becoming a member is on our website online. So with that, I saw that there are already a couple of questions coming in. So I will end with a thank you, stop our screen share. If folks want to come back on camera so that we can see all your wonderful faces and have a discussion together about the Reggie program and or anything else that we're working on, that would be awesome. Um, and thank you, Jack, for already putting a few of our resources in the chat right there. That saves some work for me. Um, Alrighty, I think Halsey, you had your hand raised during the presentation, so I'll give you priority for the first question.
Thank you, Josh. It was just a quick question. Is the Department of Energy Resources, that was the former governor's energy office, are they the body in Maine that's doing the measuring of the carbon pollution reduction? Who's doing that in Maine is what my question.
Yeah,
Where is that data and where is that data?
yeah. That responsibility lies with the Department of Environmental Protection. Um,
DEP. Okay.
Yep, the most recent, they're required by law, I think since 2004, to every other year they create sort of like a full greenhouse gas assessment for the state. The most recent one, if I remember correctly, is the 10th biennial greenhouse gas report. So if you Google 10th biennial greenhouse gas report Maine, it will pop right up. I believe there's another one due this year. They usually come out sort of mid-year. So like we'll probably have another one coming out fairly soon. But they're quite interesting and encourage people to take a look.
Yeah,
I
So
what
they're the
you'll what
ones that
you'll
are keeping,
find what you'll find is that we need to do a lot more work reducing transportation emissions.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
We spend a lot of time on renewable energy because that provides the energy for transitioning away from fossil fuels in heating and transportation. But where most of our emissions are coming from right now are in heating and transportation. So there is certainly a lot to do there um, as well.
Thank you.
thanks, Halsey. I see a good question from Jake in the chat while others are sitting on their questions. If there are no disadvantages of the bill, what are the arguments of the reps that would not vote for it? And I think if I could just tack on my own, Jack, which is that, we did see Pennsylvania walk away from this program, for example. We've seen New Jersey and Virginia, as you mentioned, flip flop. So, what are the reasons that some states historically have tried to jump out?
Yeah, I mean, uh, for historically and sort of in other states, it comes down to cost. Any additional cost that you put on power generators shows up in the market in some way. I think in th then there's a question of like, well, does that actually save you money over time? And that's where those sort of like over time cost benefit analyses really are important to do. Um, I think that sort of applies elsewhere, honestly, because we have a region-wide market that we are a part of. Our participation is not sufficient to notably reduce prices or our non-participation, for example, whereas we do substantially benefit from the energy efficiency investments that come in. So, but to your question, Jake, specifically about like this bill and the arguments of the reps to not vote for it, um, it's it's sort of there aren't arguments that hold water. It's just stuff around this is going to raise costs and a bunch of hands get waved and you know climate isn't as big a consideration as we think and why are we doing this and they're not really substantial reasons that I would say you could really take um that hold a lot of water in my opinion.
Yeah.
Um So if I hear any, I will let you know. Because sometimes we do have legislation where there's, reasonable people on both sides that could disagree on sort of how we're weighing different kinds of values. I don't think that's the case in the case of this particular bill.
Yeah, one thing I'll also note too that a couple other states like New Jersey have tried to do in the past to try to get a quick political win is to disinvest in the energy efficiency programming that the RGGI funding supports and instead turn that funding into like a rebate on your energy bill. So sending out direct support to ratepayers to try to reduce their electricity bills. What that tends to do though is disinvest in the energy efficiency programs at the cost of just a few cents on the dollar in savings for the average ratepayer. So it doesn't meaningfully reduce rates for ratepayers in a given state. And instead, it just underinvests in the efficiency programs that do have a more demonstrable benefit. And so we do see a lot of attacks on Efficiency Maine, for example, for their programming being viewed as a subsidy. But we feel it's really important to keep money flowing in. And actually, that leads me to a good question, Jack, which I think wasn't asked, which was kind of if you could make a little more clear the connection between the establishment of Efficiency Maine and the initiation of the RGGI program, because those two go very hand in hand.
Yeah. Yeah. So in many states, and in Maine included, the about 25 years ago, it became sort of clear that um, one of the least expensive ways to meet electricity demand is by lowering electricity demand, right? Like you could either build a power plant and build a bunch of, poles and wires and substations and infrastructure, or you could weatherize people's houses or switch out incandescent for LED bulbs, which was really important at that time. I think mostly, LED bulbs are now sort of dominant in the market, which is great. Um, um, the So there have often been arguments for what comes as a they call it a procurement. Basically, Efficiency Maine will ask for money from the utilities that funds their programs, and then they will spend that in cost-effective energy efficiency programs. That was a program previously that was housed at the Public Utilities Commission. As RGGI was stood up, it became clear that having two different sources of efficiency funding that would be sort of administered separately didn't really make sense. And so through the legislation that enacted RGGI in Maine, the Efficiency Maine Trust was created to be sort of a central place where they could do the most efficiency investments and do the work building up the efficiency workforce, developing relationships with contractors, and sort of standing up and strengthening those programs over time, which they've been really successful in doing over the past you know um, decade and a half. But the other point I want to sort of make about what Josh said about the importance of efficiency investments is that the minute you make an efficiency investment, say you like insulate a house, those benefits compound in perpetuity. You're saving money every day, every week, every year in perpetuity. If you do some immediate bill relief, that's good and that's great, but it has no long-term benefit. Um, and those long-term benefits aren't just cost benefits for consumers, they also act as essentially like system resources. If you um, spend money on 100,000 LED bulbs that get into people's homes in Maine, then that's 100,000 times the margin of energy use for those light bulbs that you don't have to build system resources for. You don't have to provide build new power plants, strengthen infrastructure and all that stuff. So efficiency investments don't just benefit the single home or business in which those investments are made. They actually benefit everybody. And this is like there's decades of establishment of this in the literature and the economics of all of this sort of stuff. This is not new or radical at all. Sort of started with like Amory Lovins back in the 70s. So it's like really well understood. But bringing it back up just to make sure that that history isn't forgotten um, as we think about our different options from a policy perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions from folks out there? And I'm seeing Bill, for those who make no energy efficiency or make no efficiency investments, is benefit mainly in stabilization of prices as we switch to renewables?
Um, if I understand your question, Bill, yes, basically, it's avoided costs. Um, and as we talked about before on these calls and elsewhere, the costs of of electricity are mostly driven by the peak demand moments. We saw some sort of peak demand moments this past few weeks during the cold snaps and storms that came through. And the the whole electricity system is built because it has to be able to provide everyone the energy they need at its height. But by reducing that peak or reducing the growth of that peak, everything else gets cheap. Everything gets cheaper for everybody. And that's true both on the power supply side. It means that like you don't have to fire up that last oil-fired power plant to serve that peak. And it also saves on the infrastructure side because you don't have to, grow those, replace those transformers or rebuild that section of transmission line or upgrade that substation. So both of those things are true. So yes,
Mhm.
um, basically, Bill, yes, that's right.
Thanks, Jack. All right, Anne, go for it. I see you have a hand raised.
Yes. Are there any new building codes enforced now to insulate homes better? A lot of the heat loss is from houses that don't have insulation. I know some of the insulation laws have taken place, but I don't know exactly how many. The other thing is about getting cheaper electricity. We've got to remember we're in global warming, so our infrastructure at some point is going to take one heck of a beating with winds, high winds. So that's a lot of people working in pretty awful conditions, and it's a lot of expense to replace poles and wires. So I'm not so sure that we can keep up with the costs that we have now and keep up as the future comes without taking care of the basic problems that we have in our own homes. We have solar energy, we're a hybrid system. We do put back into the grid, and we actually put back more than we use. So we're actually helping the grid. But a lot of people don't have insulation in their houses, they don't have windows. So are there any new laws on buildings?
Yeah, so in the past few years, I would have to go back and check about the details. I believe that Maine has adopted the 2021 IECC building codes, which are, as far as I understand from our folks who sort of like are really in the weeds on the building stuff, are pretty good. The problem is that that only applies to new construction. And in Maine, they only apply in communities that are over 4,000 people in population.
Mm,
So the building codes, smaller communities, oftentimes, even larger communities, there's a shortage of code enforcement officers. And so inspections of buildings is also something that is not necessarily like happening everywhere. So there's some holes there, but a
mm,
lot of that comes down to like a resource constraint, right? Like if you know, and that was that's something that it's I think haven't seen a lot of appetite for in the legislature to spread those requirements to even smaller communities who may not have the ability to enforce them. Um, Maine does have some of the oldest housing stock in the country. And one of the things that also challenges energy efficiency measures and even energy efficiency funding programs is that sometimes you're only eligible for getting new insulation if you don't have other building issues. So homes that have a broken window or mold issues those things have to be resolved before you're eligible to make energy efficiency upgrades. So there's oftentimes like a funding gap in the sort of pre-efficiency work that needs to be done, which is a real challenge in a rural, low-income state with old building stock. So it's a real challenging it's a real challenging situation, and just legislating it is not um, is not sufficient, right? Like we need to put the funds toward it, and that's why passing this Reggie bill is so important. Like this is one of our sources of efficiency funding. We need more of that, certainly not less.
Yeah. And I want to add one thing too, which is workforce. We hear this over and over again. We need to continue to develop a weatherization workforce that can actually meet the demand because the demand is out there for weatherization. And a lot of our friends in the weatherization industry talk to us frequently about just simply not having enough people to be able to go and do these upgrades that are needed and even to just assess homes. You know, you might have experienced if you've pursued weatherization assessment in your home or energy efficiency assessment, that it takes a while to get someone in to be able to assess your home and then even longer after that to make the necessary upgrades. So we need to continue to invest in the programs that are teaching folks how to do these really important skills and participating in our clean energy workforce. I also didn't want to lose kind of the part two of that question, Jack, because I think it really and just really hit the crux of one of the big problems that we face regularly in our climate and clean energy program, which is the urgency of climate change and the knowledge that this is going to continue to impact our infrastructure versus the investments that we need to make now to hit our clean energy goals. And so I wonder if you can kind of speak to that briefly, Jack.
Um, well, I mean, I think, and to what you were saying, you know, we're already seeing some of that storm damage happening, right? I mean, and if you go and look at the report that I posted at the beginning of the call, you know, it's a probably the second biggest bill impact is storm cost recovery. When these storms come in, knock down a ton of knock down a ton of poles, trip a bunch of wires. They have, hire crews from out of state to run around getting everyone's power turned on. And then those costs are put back into rates. And because of the, sort of the history of this, where these storm costs haven't been that big, they recover them over just a couple of years. Whereas like if you build like a new substation, that's going to be recovered over 10 or more years. So you get this big like surge of storm costs. We're just paying off now the damage from some of the big storms in like 2023, 2024. Um, so it's definitely something that we're already starting to see. Um, in 2022, we did institute a integrated grid planning process. And sort of parallel to that, that was a requirement for utilities to do grid planning in the context of our climate and clean energy goals. Also part of that was basically like a climate risk assessment for infrastructure, which requires the utilities to sort of like articulate the risks and their plan to mitigate the risks to their infrastructure. So the most obvious example is like, are there substations that are within a few feet of sea level, in certain parts of the state, or things like that. But that is sort of planning that's underway. Those plans are sort of the first drafts of those are like just coming out now after several years of sort of like defining the requirements and having the utilities go and do the work. So some of that is underway, but I think your gut sense is right, which is that we're going to see more impacts on infrastructure um, from climate change itself and the extreme weather that it's tied to. Um, it's another reason why we should also pass LD 1870 to create a climate superfund, which we've talked about here on this call as well in the past. I hope that sort of covered what you were thinking, Josh.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I'll just do a plug for Superfund as well. As Jack mentioned, we've talked about this in the past. We have a new guest blog on the Superfund as well. That's really great if you haven't had a chance to read that. But that bill also got reported out of committee with a favorable vote, which means that it is now headed to the full House and Senate for votes. So add 1870 to your list of bills to reach out to your legislator and encourage them to support if you haven't yet done so. All right, folks, any other questions about Reggie or otherwise that we can help answer?
While people think about that, Josh, I just wanted to say one other thing about sort of the challenges of weatherization and especially low income weatherization. A number of the agencies across the state that sort of perform this service, where they, work on in more rural areas, of the state, they focus on low income homeowners or renters. A lot of those service agencies are under an incredible amount of pressure right now because of federal funding cuts. A lot of those agencies also do other sort of basic human services work, whether that's transportation assistance or childcare or health, community health work. All of the programs are which are getting cut. So many of these agencies are sort of, even though it may not be exactly the types of funding that are earmarked for efficiency that they might like do through efficiency Maine incentives, they're losing their overhead because of all of these other programs that are getting cut. And so we've heard stories of, um, you know, cap agencies in Washington County that are having to let go of their energy efficiency staff because they no longer have other sources of funding and are just trying to make ends meet on the budget. So the loss of federal funding has a major impact on this as well. Um, as part of that. So I just wanted to just point out that connection as well, that when we cut back on basic human services at the federal level, even if it's not a climate and clean energy program, it really does affect our ability to make progress in these areas too.
Halsey, I see your hand. I just wanted to tack onto this while we're here. Jack, is the Reggie program at all affected by the Trump administration and their deregulatory efforts? This is the type of program you could see the Trump administration pursuing. Is that something you've heard rumblings about?
Not as of yet, no. It's a state-based regulatory sort of compact, and so it's not really subject to federal jurisdiction at this point. So yeah.
All right, Halsey, go for it.
Thanks. Jack pointed out how the majority of our greenhouse gas emissions really are coming from the transportation sector. And does Reggie touch that at all? And so my question is, what sectors is Reggie focused on? Residential, commercial? Um, I, I don't see that it's affecting transportation at all, is it?
It's not. No, it is power plants.
Power plants.
Yep.
So
Yep.
power generation only.
Yep. Fossil fuel plants over 25 megawatts are the covered entities under RGGI. It's targeted specifically at those sources.
Okay.
But the efficiency investments that can be made via the funding that we receive from Reggie can be invested through Efficiency Maine in a number of ways, which I think includes rebates for things like home charging. So there is that connection.
Yeah, there was an effort actually to create a sort of parallel program. It was called the Transportation Climate Initiative
Hmm.
um, in 2020, 2021,
Yeah.
and the years leading up to that, which would have done something similar on sort of on transportation fuels, and then having that money roll back into state transportation funds. But that basically fell victim to sort of the pandemic economy. It was had some bad timing. And so because it would have sort of a marginal impact on fuel prices, again, probably within the range of like the way that gas prices fluctuate anyway. But there was just no political appetite to institute that across states. And so we had many of the governors who were in those discussions pull out, and it sort of has sort of withered a little bit.
Yeah.
But that was certainly that was something that we worked on as NRCM. Um, but unfortunately, it's without the participation of other states, it'd be a challenge for us to put that into place.
And I'd love to see it resurrected. And it only could be, I think, because Reggie has been such an effective model, right? So Reggie has that impact as well, in that it shows that regional collaboration is possible and can lead to real benefits for states. I first joined NRCM in 2021, and we were at that time really excited about the Transportation Climate Initiative. And they were like, this is an opportunity for us to jump in and advocate for funding that can come from a regional source because we don't have a massive tax base in Maine and can't always come up with the funding and are therefore facing a big highway fund deficit. But yeah, Connecticut and Massachusetts pulled out at a pretty critical time, and so that's not moving forward as of right now.
Is there any focus in the Environmental Priorities Coalition on uh, resurrecting that in a legislative? Because that would take legislation, right, for Maine to do something like that.
I think before we would pursue state-based legislation, Halsey, like it would require sort of conversations between the state governments and state leadership. It's something that we really do all have to do together as states, for it to be effective and viable.
Mhm.
So as of right now, there's not a legislative proposal because um, there's no sort of like work on the interstate level going on with having some of those other states pull out.
Yeah,
Hmm.
but similar to Reggie, it started with a memorandum of understanding between states, of which Maine was a part. So that, we could definitely reach back out to those states. We have an election upcoming. It could be something that a new governor could try to initiate, is a conversation around regional collaboration. And we would certainly be supportive of that effort. But it's kind of a level above the state legislature, at least right now. Alrighty, we're winding towards the end of an hour here. Are there any remaining questions before we let you back to your Thursday afternoons?
Hi, this is Heidi. I'm a volunteer with NRCM. I just have a real quick question. Maybe you said it at the beginning. What's the status of the LD 2037 and the other one, the 1870 bill too?
Yeah, both of those bills were got positive votes in committee, and so it's a great time to talk to your legislators, but in advance of the bills getting to the floor. 2037, the Reggie bill was sponsored by Representative Kessler, so that will go to the House first. 1870 was sponsored by Senator Stacey Brenner from Scarborough, and so that one will go to the Senate first. But really the legislative leadership is operating on a clip to get themselves out of Augusta by April, and so things will be moving as quickly as they can. That's their intention. So
Yeah, and,
I'm
and I'll
very
just
Right.
note, for as a reminder for folks, committees are assembled and they're 10 to 12 legislators, and they're working on a specific focus area. That's your opportunity to go and provide, testimony to this committee at a public hearing, for example, or reach out in a targeted way to these committee members. Once it gets reported out of committee, it's next going to be seen by the entire body. So this is a really good opportunity to make sure that we're reaching out to all the legislators that are going to be voting on both of these respective bills, and is frankly my favorite part of the legislative process, because it means that we get to be in the halls talking to legislators directly about a bill that they're going to be seeing shortly before them on the House or Senate floor.
Okay, thank you. And do you know of anybody in particular in any of the districts that are firmly opposed or signaling opposition?
We don't yet have a target list for these bills just yet. Jack, correct me if there are some that we should be directing people to. I think the number one thing is to reach out to your legislator, the person who represents you, because that's who you're going to have the most influence over. But part of our campaign planning is always to establish that target list. That target list often gets developed as we're in the halls hearing feedback from legislators. So if I have a conversation with a legislator and they express concerns, then we identify them as a target, and then we encourage people in their district to reach out to them at that juncture. So you will be hearing more from us, and we'll probably get out an action alert on LD 2037 and perhaps LD 1870 as well. So that's a communication you can expect to see from us.
Okay, great.
yeah I,
Thank you.
yeah. The thing I would add there is that there's there can be sort of like well, you could either call it like a herd mentality or you could call it momentum. in the legislature, which is so even if you have a legislator that you expect to support the bill because they're, tend to be good on climate and, and supportive of clean energy and climate action, putting this on their radar as something that they have heard is really helpful because then when the caucus conversations come up, the before session, the different caucuses, like all of the House Democrats will meet in a big room and talk about what's going on that day. If more of those people have heard about the bill and already know that they're going to support it, that affects that whole conversation internally. And those are closed to outside advocates. So don't worry about whether there's like a couple of target folks for now. Make sure your legislator has heard about it and that you've confirmed with them that they like know the bill number, they're going to be supportive and all of those things, because that's actually really important too, to sort of softening the ground all the way down.
Totally. And I think that's actually a great note to end on, because I think that's exactly what we would encourage you to do this afternoon if you do have the time, is to give a quick call or shoot an email over. As always, I'm available to help with that. And like I said, if you want to take it a step further and prepare a remark either for a letter to the editor or an op-ed, we'd love to work with you on that as well. But with that, we will see you next month for our climate action call, and hopefully even sooner at the State House for our Waste Day of Action next Thursday, if you're available to join us next Thursday at 9 a.m. All right, enjoy the rest of your weeks all.